The first shock came not from the press, not from a headline, but from a quiet knock on a door deep inside Buckingham Palace. The kind of knock that carries the weight of decades of history, of whispered secrets, of unspoken expectations. Prince Harry, once confident in his place in the royal line, would learn that morning that the life he had imagined for himself, a life beside his father, following in his footsteps, shaping the monarchy alongside his brother, was about to shatter in ways he never saw coming. Did King Charles really just make the decision to strip his youngest son of his royal title? And if so, why now of all moments? The answer, as the world would soon discover, was as shocking as it was complicated. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all began quietly, under the radar of cameras and tabloids, with what appeared to be a routine meeting in one of the palace's lesser-known chambers. But in that room, advisors with decades of experience, trusted aides who had served the monarchy through crises both public and private, debated a decision so monumental that even the most seasoned among them felt a shiver run down their spines. By the time the meeting ended, the die was cast. Harry, the prince who had once walked alongside William, who had dreamed of being a pillar of the monarchy, would be left standing outside the circle of power. And William, quiet, calculating William, would take his place, ready to inherit not just the throne, but the symbolic weight of an entire nation's expectation. The world didn't see this coming. For weeks, rumors swirled in the tabloids. There were whispers of tension between father and son, suggestions that Harry had grown too independent, too rebellious, too public with his opinions and choices. But no one imagined that these private disagreements would culminate in a move as irreversible as this one. How does a king decide to bypass a son? And more importantly, how does that son survive when the world watches every reaction, every misstep, every tear? Harry had always been the prince in exile, the one caught between duty and desire, between tradition and modernity. He had married Meghan Markle, a woman who herself had navigated the treacherous waters of public scrutiny and royal expectation. Together, they had sought to carve out a life that respected the crown yet maintained their independence. But independence, as the palace would demonstrate, comes at a price. And the price Harry would pay now was greater than anyone, himself included, could have imagined. The palace corridors had never been silent. They carried the echoes of history, the footsteps of monarchs past, and the whispers of those who served. But on that particular morning, the corridors hummed with a tension so palpable it could be felt through the walls. Staff whispered behind closed doors. Aides exchanged worried glances. The newspapers remained oblivious, their reporters gathering stories from the outside, unaware of the drama unfolding in the rooms above. In that moment, Harry was not just a prince. He was the center of a storm the magnitude of which no one yet understood. Consider the contrast. William, who had long been the picture of royal composure, quietly preparing for the future, absorbing lessons from his father, understanding the expectations of a nation, versus Harry, whose life had been marked by a series of bold moves, public declarations, and outspoken critiques. The brothers had always been different. One measured, one impulsive. One patient, one fiery. But this was a moment where differences mattered more than ever. The king's decision to elevate William, to hand him the crown and its privileges, while simultaneously stripping Harry of his titles, was a culmination of decades of observation, consultation, and perhaps frustration. What made this moment even more riveting was its secrecy. Unlike other royal controversies that leak almost immediately, this decision was held tightly within palace walls. Rumors began to circulate. A private letter, a secret meeting, a royal decree prepared but never publicly announced. And when the first hints of the news reached Harry, he was reportedly stunned, caught between disbelief and a growing sense of betrayal. Could a father truly act in such a way? Could a king truly bypass a son, regardless of rank, regardless of lineage? The answer, as history would soon reveal, was yes, but the reasons were layered, complex, and profoundly personal. The public would later see only the surface of the drama: headlines, news clips, social media storms. But behind the public spectacle was a story of human emotion, of family dynamics stretched to breaking points, of ambition and expectation colliding with love and loyalty. Harry's reaction was, as expected, intensely human. Anger, hurt, confusion, questions that had no immediate answers. And Meghan, ever the strategist, ever the protector, reportedly worked tirelessly to support him while navigating her own position within a family that now seemed fractured. The emotional stakes were high. This was not merely a redistribution of titles. It was a symbolic act that reshaped the very hierarchy of the monarchy. By removing Harry's title, King Charles was sending a message. Loyalty and discretion mattered more than personal ambition. Tradition mattered more than rebellion. The crown, centuries old, demanded obedience. And yet, there was an irony here that was hard to ignore. Harry, the prince who had been admired for his service, his dedication to veterans, and his charitable work, was now being pushed to the margins, his contributions seemingly overlooked in the calculus of royal politics. Consider the ripple effect. What would this mean for Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet? How would the public perceive the family, now visibly divided at its highest levels? And what of William, suddenly thrust into the spotlight in a role that carried not only privilege but immense responsibility? Every action, every decision, every glance would be scrutinized. The monarchy had always thrived on perception as much as tradition, and now perception was on a knife's edge. Even advisors were divided. Some argued that Harry's removal was necessary to preserve the dignity of the crown, to prevent future public scandals, to maintain a semblance of unity in a family that had become increasingly complex. Others questioned whether the move would backfire, creating a rift too deep to heal, fueling public sympathy for Harry and resentment toward William and Charles. In the palace, arguments grew heated. Documents were drafted, revised, and debated. Legal teams considered every angle, ensuring that the decision, once enacted, would be legally sound and irreversible. And then there was the human element, the part that no advisor or lawyer could fully control: emotion. Harry was a son, a brother, a father. Stripping him of his title was not simply a matter of law or protocol. It was a deeply personal act, one that would leave scars for decades to come. Reports suggest that the king himself struggled with the decision, aware of its emotional toll, but convinced that it was necessary for the long-term stability of the monarchy. William, meanwhile, remained the calm eye of the storm, absorbing each development with a measured patience that contrasted sharply with Harry's more visible turmoil. At this point, the audience must ask, how did it come to this? How does a royal family, steeped in centuries of tradition, reach a point where a son is publicly and legally marginalized? The answers lie in a combination of personal choices, public controversies, and the subtle, sometimes ruthless calculations of power. And while the headlines would eventually simplify the story into a neat narrative of betrayal and ambition, the reality was far more intricate, far more shocking. What happened next would change the course of the monarchy and alter Harry's life forever. Letters that had been locked away, meetings that had been kept secret, and decisions made in hushed tones were about to come to light. And when they did, the world would see a royal family not as a seamless institution of tradition and decorum, but as a living, breathing entity, full of conflict, emotion, and heartbreak. The drama was only beginning. In the coming chapters, we will uncover every hidden move, every whispered conversation, every calculated decision that led to this unprecedented moment. From the corridors of Buckingham Palace to private messages and secret letters, from William's patient rise to Harry's emotional turmoil, the story is far more intricate and far more shocking than anyone imagined. And yet, even as the world waits to see the fallout, one question remains: what did Harry do next? How would he respond to a decision that redefined not just his role in the family, but the very legacy he had been born into? The answer, when it comes, is not just shocking. It is a turning point that will redefine the monarchy itself. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the person you trusted most makes a decision that changes your life forever? That's the question Prince Harry faced the morning he discovered that his place in the monarchy was no longer secure. The air inside Buckingham Palace was thick with tension, a quiet storm building in the gilded halls where generations of royals had walked with confidence. But on this day, The palace itself seemed to sense the impending upheaval. Staff moved nervously, exchanging glances and half-whispered warnings. Nothing had been confirmed, yet everyone knew that something monumental was about to happen. The crisis began with a phone call. Not a grand announcement, not a public declaration. Just a phone call to a private aide, summoning Harry to a discreet meeting with someone higher up. The aide reportedly hesitated for a moment, knowing that what was about to be said could reshape the royal family forever. And then Harry was walking down a hallway he had known his whole life, flanked by portraits of monarchs long gone, feeling a mixture of anticipation and dread. When he entered the room, the atmosphere was already tense. Advisors who had served the crown for decades were gathered, their expressions unreadable, their hands folded tightly. Some looked uneasy, others appeared resigned, as if they had been expecting this moment for weeks. Harry's heart pounded in his chest. Questions swirled in his mind. What was this meeting about? Had he done something wrong? Or was this about something bigger, something he couldn't yet see? The first words cut through the silence. They were calm, precise, almost clinical. Harry, the king has made a decision regarding your titles and your place in the line of succession. Harry froze. Titles? Line of succession? The words themselves felt surreal, like something out of a story he had never thought could become his reality. For a moment, time seemed to stop. He looked around the room, searching for a hint of jest, a sign that this was a mistake. But no one smiled. No one blinked. This was real. The decision, as he would learn, was irreversible. King Charles, after consultations with advisors, legal experts, and senior members of the royal family, had concluded that Harry would be stripped of his royal titles. He would no longer hold the style of His Royal Highness. He would be removed from the line of succession. The implications were immediate and profound. This was not a matter of ceremony or symbolism. This was a restructuring of the monarchy itself, a redefinition of family and power, and Harry was at the center of it. What made the situation even more intense was the secrecy surrounding it. No public announcement had been made. No official statement. Everything was happening behind closed doors, in the corridors of power that few outside the palace would ever see. Rumors had been circulating for weeks, hints of tension between father and son, whispers of disagreements over public behavior and personal choices. But no one imagined that it would come to this, a deliberate, legal, and personal action that would remove Harry from the royal fold. As the news sank in, Harry's emotions shifted like a storm. First came disbelief, then came anger, and beneath it all, an aching sense of betrayal. How could his father, someone he had respected, someone he had admired, someone he had loved, decide to cut him out in such a definitive way? The aides in the room tried to maintain their composure, offering rehearsed words of support, but it was clear that nothing could soften the blow. Harry's life, as he had known it, was being dismantled piece by piece. But it wasn't just the titles that mattered. The act carried symbolism that resonated far beyond the palace walls. Titles in the monarchy are more than labels. They are badges of responsibility, markers of heritage, and tools of influence. To remove Harry's title was to send a message not only to him, but to the public, the Commonwealth, and even to future generations. It was a statement. The monarchy prioritizes loyalty, discretion, and the preservation of tradition above all else. It was also a signal that rebellion, even when born from personal conviction or a desire for independence, would not be tolerated. Harry was not alone in this. Meghan Markle, his wife, had been navigating her own position in the family, balancing public perception with private strategy. But even her experience and influence could not prevent what was unfolding. Reports suggest that Meghan worked tirelessly behind the scenes to mitigate the fallout, to offer advice and support, and to advocate for Harry in the corridors of power. Yet, for all her efforts, the decision was made. The power of the crown, centuries in the making, could not be swayed by even the most compelling arguments. Meanwhile, William, Harry's older brother, was quietly stepping into the role that would soon define him. William had always been measured, careful, and calculated, traits that had prepared him for this moment. He watched from a distance as the drama unfolded, absorbing information, reading the reactions of advisors, and preparing himself for a future that had now arrived sooner than expected. There was no overt celebration, no gloating. But those close to the family noted the calm confidence that marked his demeanor. This was his moment, and he understood it better than anyone. The public would eventually see the story through headlines and social media posts.